This video is sponsored by Brilliant.org. More later in the video.
Hey guys, Quiv the Lazy Geek here and welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be very nerdy, but at the same time it is absolutely essential for anyone who is located in a light polluted city and do astrophotography. And this is because sooner or later you'll be using narrowband filters, and I'll get to those, what they are in a moment. But narrowband filters, they can work very differently depending on the telescope that you use to do your astrophotography. And in one telescope, a given filter might work great and work not at all in a different telescope. And it's been up to now extremely difficult to estimate which filter will work well for what telescope. In this video, I will show you a spreadsheet that I've created that does basically all of the calculations to tell you exactly, or as closely as we can, how a given filter will perform for a given telescope. And that is super duper important because the impact is crazy. Take an H-alpha filter, use it on this telescope, it will work great. Take the same filter, use it on a RASA 8 or a C6 hyperstar telescope, it's going to work terribly. If you're a long-time astrophotographer, you know the reason for that, but I don't think you've been able to compute it. And that's what we're going to do in this video. I want to thank one of my Patreon supporters, by the way, for giving me this idea because they asked me a lot of very pointed questions about how to compute that. And I decided, hey, this is a good topic for everyone, and it is also essential. Okay, going back to narrowband filters, what are they? Narrowband filters, they are basically filters that narrowband filters are basically filters that let in only a very specific color of the spectrum. So it so happens that there are types of objects called emission nebulae, like the Orion Nebula, the surroundings of the Horsehead Nebula, the California Nebula, the North American Nebula, and all sorts of nebula goodness all over the place. Well, those nebula, they emit at very specific colors the most of their signal. They'll emit in the deep red for wavelengths called H-alpha or hydrogen alpha, emitted by ionized hydrogen atoms. They'll also emit in a slightly different deep red, slightly deeper red, sulfur 2 wavelengths, and that's sulfur atoms. They'll also emit in the blue-green kind of spectrum with oxygen 3. Oxygen atoms. And narrowband filters, with those, we can isolate just those colors and reject everything else. Which means that while we accept the light pollution that is within that little tiny bandpass of color that we are accepting, we are rejecting all of the rest of the light pollution. So it is an extremely effective way to combat light pollution from the city. It is actually even pretty much the best and the only real way in very light polluted cities like here in Tokyo to combat light pollution. And so that's why I'm saying this video is essential if you live in the city, because sooner or later you will go towards narrowband filters. In fact, I'm sure that a lot of you already use narrowband filters. So just to quickly show you, this is a bandpass chart of a narrowband filter. So we have on the y-axis, it's the transmission in percent, so how much light is being transmitted. And then on the x-axis, it is the wavelengths, basically the color that we are isolating. This particular filter is an IDAS filter, where they give you your per filter measurement of the filter, which is absolutely amazing. And this is a pre-shifted filter made for things like the RASA telescopes for H-alpha. And we can see, okay, most of the time light isn't passed, but no, it starts to be passed around here. The maximum is around there, and then we stop passing it. So we pass all of the light that is within this area of color. So that includes the target wavelength, but also all of the light pollution that's in there. But we reject everything else, which is amazing. But there is a problem with those filters, is that this bandpass that is shown, it's only true for light rays that hit the filter straight on. So if this is the filter, I need my light ray to come exactly 90 degrees onto my filter. And take a telescope like this one. We have the objective lens here, and then we have the camera sensor at prime focus, effectively there. So you have all of your light rays that for the very center of your field of view, you have all of your light rays that come in parallel exactly at this angle, so parallel to the telescope angle itself. And so if you have a light ray that comes in through the very center of the objective lens, it just goes straight towards the camera. And so if you have the filter around here, let's say, it will hit the filter at exactly a 90-degree angle. So it will take advantage of the bandpass of the filter exactly as designed. Everything is peachy. But imagine another light ray which also focuses at the very center of your field of view, but it hits the edge of the objective lens, the very edge of the objective lens. Well, it is refracted so that it will basically do this kind of path. So you can see now we actually have an angle. The filter that is located here is hit at an angle. And what happens when you hit the filter at an angle, the bandpass of the filter is actually shifted towards the blue. And so if you're unlucky and the angle is actually sharp enough, then maybe that light ray that hit the outside of my objective lens and then gets to the camera, well, maybe the filter blocked it completely because its bandpass was shifted enough. And if we want to look at a representation of such a shift, this is how it looks like. The gray one there is the initial original bandpass, and then depending on the angle and actually of the telescope you use, the effective bandpass is shifted towards the blue spectrum. And that's how it works. But you can see there's a problem there. Obviously, with this telescope, not all of the rays come in at this angle. Some of the rays, they come in perfectly perpendicular to the filter, and some of the rays, they don't. So we need to account for all of those at once. And so what we can do is we take the telescope objective lens and we can basically split it or cut it into tiny donuts. And I personally used 1 millimeter thick donuts from the very outside of the aperture to the very inside of the aperture. And then for each of those donuts, we compute the angle of the light rays that hit the camera sensor at the center. And then we see how much of a bandpass shift that represents at the filter level. And thus we're able to compute exactly how much of the target bandpass was passed by the tiny disk at the very edge of the aperture, and by the second disk that's slightly less close to the edge, and by the third disk, and by the fourth disk, etc., until you get to the center of the objective lens. We're able to compute all of that, and once you've done all of those computations, you can just add all of the disks together to see overall how much of the target wavelength or color you've passed. And then you know how much or how well your specific telescopes works with your specific filter. And the results can be extremely surprising, especially for telescopes that have central obstructions. Because remember, for this telescope, it's a refractor. It doesn't have any central obstructions. So we do have light rays that basically go through like exactly the center of the objective lens. There's no angle. They're quite perpendicular to the filter itself. There's no bandpass shift for that particular light ray. But if I have a central obstruction, like with a Newtonian telescope, those don't exist. Every single of my light rays that hit the filter is at an angle, is not perpendicular to the filter. And so there is bandpass shift for everything on Newtonian telescopes, Schmidt-Cassegrain telescopes, or even worse, RASA or hyperstar telescopes. The degree at which there's bandpass shift and how much this affects the efficiency of the filter, until I computed it myself, I didn't realize how staggering it was. And I'll show you how staggering it is in a moment. And by the way, I'm sure that a lot of you, when you saw me explaining those little donuts on top of the aperture that I'm using to compute that overall bandpass shift and efficacy of my filter for my telescope, I used 1 millimeter donuts. And a lot of you, their mind went to mathematics and you thought like, hey, can't you just use integrals? The answer is absolutely yes, but my knowledge of integrals is a bit too rusty these days, so I decided to go with this approach. Fortunately, in the near future, I'll be able to refresh my memory of integrals using today's video sponsor, Brilliant.org, because Brilliant is really the best way to learn math, physics, science, machine learning, AI, computer science, all of that good stuff. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in math, data analysis, programming, and AI. In particular, in this case, they do cover integrals, and that's what I'm probably going to use to polish up on that. What I really like with Brilliant is that it's extremely interactive, which makes it extremely effective to learn stuff. Lessons are structured almost as a problem that you need to solve, and so it just sticks, right? You're not just passively learning from a video or something like that. And at the same time, because you need to solve stuff, it helps build your critical thinking skills. through that problem solving. It's not just learning about integrals, but you'll be able to actually compute them. At the same time, those problems, they're almost like little mini games within the learning environment, and so it helps develop a powerful daily learning habit. And because those lessons are bite-sized, with just a few minutes a day, you can really build real knowledge, and you want to get back every day because it's actually really fun. And of course, there's tons of courses on Brilliant on a range of available topics. New courses are added all of the time, and they're available for every level of learning that you're at. And for instance, I'd want to take calculus courses that are available, and in those math courses, you'll have to build and use formulas, enhance your visual and spatial problem-solving skills, and it also focuses on the essentials with lessons that highlight the most useful applicable math concept. And all of those can be put to practice in our hobby with this narrowband filter analysis, but also with the processing tools that we use. So if you'd like to try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/quivlazygeek or scan the QR code on screen, or you can click on the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Now, where were we? Oh yes, I want to show you my spreadsheet, show you the results of various filters, and you can really simulate pretty much any filter using that spreadsheet, and show you those results on various telescopes. And again, you can simulate pretty much any telescope. And I'll also show you how to adjust that spreadsheet to make it work for you. And of course, I'll have the link to the spreadsheet down in the video description, together with links to my equipment, that kind of stuff. Because if you ever want to support the work that I do in this channel, and you want to do it at no cost to you, you can just go down below, click on any of the links in there, make a purchase if you're planning on buying anything from Agena, Amazon, High Point Scientific, etc. Or if you want to simply leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, it really helps the channel out. You can also leave a comment with your thoughts on that. I think you want to hold off though until you've seen the results, because again, they're a bit staggering. If you want to support me even more, you can join my Patreon as a member. It really helps the channel out. Or you can join the channel itself as a member. Again, really helps out. This channel would not be possible without you guys. You truly help support my endeavor and help support the community as a whole, and I cannot express how thankful I am. Okay, with that, let's go inside. Okay, I'm on my computer and I have opened the spreadsheet whose link I'm sharing in the description. Just make a copy to your own Google Drive or download it to use it yourself. And we have here what I've been using. And you can see the spreadsheet has multiple stuff in there. We have the filter definition fields, the telescope definition, the target wavelength, which wavelength you want to pass. For instance, 656.3 is H alpha. And then at the bottom here, I'm using my slices from 75 millimeter outer radius to 74 millimeter outer radius, etc., to compute the filter transmission based on the characteristics that we have here with the bandpass shift. And you can see that I've created one tab for each telescope that I want to compute the information with. The fields in green are the one that we can change. And you can see in here we have the filter definition, where you have the bandpass center. So here I've created or modeled a filter that has a bandpass center exactly at 656.3 nanometers, which is the wavelength for hydrogen alpha, and that has a full width half max of 7 nanometers, which is exactly like something like the Optolong L-Extreme has, or a lot of narrowband filters have. At the same time, I have the flat top dimension. The flat top is this little area there. Basically, it's telling the filter model whether the filter has a flat top. Let's put it to 0 nanometer to show you how it looks like. Without flat top, it looks very much like a simple curve like that. But with a flat top here, it's 1.5 nanometer wide flat top, it will actually flatten at the very top of the curve, and that actually helps make the transmission of the filter better throughout like small changes in the bandpass shift. And so this is what I use to define my filter. There is one parameter that is unknown by default, which is the effective refractive index of the filter. So the refractive index is just a measure of how effectively how fast the light goes through a specific medium. And for glass, it's typically 1.5. Here I have 1.45. But actually, we have some data from our awesome friend Jim Thompson on the Cloudy Nights forums that has done some measurements for a variety of filters and filter brands. And using this, we can actually figure out for different brands what type of refractive index we can expect. And effectively, the higher the refractive index for a given filter is, the more resistant it is to bandpass shift. And you can see that for IDAS filters, it seems to be around 2.1 as an effective refraction index. For chroma filters, it seems to be a bit above that, let's say around 2.1 to 2.2. So those are excellent. For Antlia filters, we seem to be, depending on the filter, around refractive index of 2 or maybe around 1.9 for another one. And the worst of the bunch right now in this graph is the Optolong H alpha, which is roughly at 1.8. So it tells us that for most filters, we should be good with a refracting index between 1.8 and 2.2. And we can have like basically the worst case scenario or bad case scenario by setting it here to 1.8, the lowest value. And you can see I have modeled here my Carbon Star 150, and I get an overall transmission with this filter that I have modeled here of 98.7%. If the peak transmittance of my filter was just like 0.9, so 90% transmittance here, then my effective transmittance for this particular telescope is still 0.89 roughly, so 89%. Very good. This filter is going to work excellently for this particular telescope. But for instance, what if we had a very similar filter, but our flat top was only, let's say, 1 nanometer, and our full width half max was 4 nanometers, like basically my Altair narrowband filters gives us. Suddenly, we go from a peak transmittance of 0.9 to 0.82, so only 82% of the light is being used properly. It's still a very good figure, we don't have any issue, but if we go still down to a full width half max of 3 nanometer, we narrow the bandpass even more, meaning it's more affected by bandpass shift. And maybe our flat top in that case is 0.5 nanometers wide. Then we get down to 71%. Still usable, but you can see the filter is less and less effective as it gets narrower for this particular telescope because it's a fairly fast telescope at f4. And by the way, if we get exactly the same filter bandpass characteristics, but we place it around oxygen 3 at 500.7, then you can see that the overall transmission that was 72% a moment ago is now almost 80%. And this is because oxygen 3, or the bluer bandpasses, are less affected by this bandpass shift than the redder bandpasses. So we can verify this using this calculation here. And I can take the same filter that I had originally here, but on my Quattro 150p, which has a focal ratio of 3.5 compared to 4 on the Carbon Star, so it's even faster. Let's put the refractive index to 1.8, and now we can see a slightly less good, but still very reasonable 96% transmission. Okay, what about another very popular telescope with that kind of filter, the RASA 8? Here you can see that again I have a very similar filter here, but this time, because the RASA 8 is such a fast telescope, the overall transmission is only 62%. That is pretty bad actually. And it's going to get even worse with the Hyperstar C6 because it has a larger central obstruction by a percentage of overall diameter. And you can see the same filter is now 58.7% of transmission. So things are getting bad. If I were to use one of the Altair filters that I have with my RASA 8, no, I don't have a RASA 8, but I can always like dream. But let's say with a RASA 8, let's say it would be something like this, and the effective refractive index, I was actually nice here of 2, and I was also nice here. It should be 1.8 really to be a worst case scenario. But you can see now my overall transmission with a 4 nanometer bandpass filter is 0.18, only 18% of the light. Because H-alpha is so strong, it's still going to give us great results, but it's something that you wouldn't really realize until you actually do the computation for that particular filter. And by the way, for the 7 nanometer filter, I actually did a fun exercise. So let me put it back to 7 nanometers and a flat top of 1.5 nanometer wide. I took several target wavelengths. I put like 645, and I had a refractive index of 2. And then I put that figure in here, 645 this, and then 646. And then I put that figure in there, etc., etc. And that gives me, for that particular filter and that particular telescope, how well it will pass each wavelength in here. And we can see that for that particular telescope, this filter here is best at around 653.2 nanometer, roughly. And it doesn't give us 100% anymore. It gives us less than 100%. So we can never go back to 100% due to this bandpass shift and the fact that we have a telescope that is very fast with a central obstruction. But you can see we can get a lot of information from there. And let's take, for instance, this filter here. I have this filter bandpass that was measured in a spectrometer, and this is an ultra high-speed filter by IDAS with a full width half max of f6.8 of 6.8 nanometers. And so this one is made specifically for something like the RASA. So let me input its characteristics into my filter here and see what I can expect for the RASA 8, see if it actually makes sense. So we have a filter whose bandpass center is actually pre-shifted to the right to roughly 659. So 659, and the full width half max is 6.8 nanometers. The flat top is actually roughly almost 2. I'll say 1.5, that's good enough. And we saw that for IDAS filters, we are apparently getting something around 2, even 2.1. So I can be generous and say 2.1 as the effective refractive index. And the peak transmittance is roughly, according to my chart here, 0.95. So what do we get here for a target wavelength of 656.3? We get 93% compared to 95% that we have on the filter. So you can see that using judiciously, and exactly, this is exactly the kind of specs that you would want to have with a filter that is pre-shifted for your RASA 8, we are still at 93% transmission for the RASA 8, which is excellent. And so I can verify whether a specific filter is going to work for my specific telescope. Let's say you want to add another telescope. What you would do is you would take this tab, you could just duplicate a tab, and just here you want to put your telescope aperture. That one is important. You want to put your focal length, it's also important, and you want to put your central obstruction. That's just FYI. Let's say we wanted to say a RASA 11. Okay, so RASA 11, I'm on the specs. The aperture is 279 millimeters. So let's put 279 here. The focal length is 620. So I'll put 620 in the focal length. And the central obstruction is 114 millimeters. So let me put that 114 in here. And now what I can do is I need to rebuild all of those lines. I'm gonna, basically change the first line to be, first we want to analyze the very first slice of the telescope, which is from 279 outer radius, divided by 2 actually. So 139.5 to 278, so 139. And then the next one will be 139 to 138. And then my next slice would be 138 to 137, etc., etc. So now I can grab those two here, drag that down. For now, I'll go all the way to the bottom here. But you can see I only go down to a slice whose inner radius is 86. We want to go all the way to the central obstruction, whose radius is, 57, right? So it's half this value. So I need to add more lines. I'll do that right now. And I'm going to select those and drag that down. Still not yet, we need 10 more lines. Okay, and now we have the whole aperture covered. Next, I can just drag and drop all of those. They're pre-computed, they're still gonna work. Now we have everything. I just need to change this formula here. We need to make sure that we sum from the very first cell here, D21, to the very last one, which is D103. And I want to do the same thing here, so to H103. And here we have the overall transmission, which is computed for that particular filter, and we're still at almost 93%. You can see how much that filter was and effectively is designed for something like the RASA. But you saw that a standard 7 nanometer narrowband filter with something like the Hyperstar C6, which I used to use, will only give us roughly 43% transmission if we're lucky. If the refractive index is a bit better, we're at 58%. If it's worse and it's the same as glass, then suddenly we're at 20%. So this can get really bad. But what if the bandpass itself was not well centered? What if the center of the bandpass was below 656.3? Let's say something like 654.3 or 655.3. Up. This is now my center bandpass. If we look at the filter, 656.3, which is our target wavelength, is still at 100% transmission, at least according to this chart. So we're fine, except that we're not. You can see the overall transmission from my Hyperstar C6 went from 43% to 26%. We're losing a lot by having this bandpass not well centered. If the bandpass is not well centered, but in the other direction, so instead of 655.3, we're at 657.3 in terms of bandpass centering, then suddenly we jump to 63%. So you can see how much the filter specifications have a huge impact, and that impact is all the huger the faster your telescope is. Even with something like the Carbon Star 150, which is just, f4, it's not that incredibly fast. If I set my filter center to 655.3 with a full width half max of 7, my target wavelength is 656.3, so H alpha, and my flat top is 1.5 nanometers. This is the shape that we're getting. The filter peak transmittance is 90%. You can see that my overall transmission, just by having this not super well-centered bandpass, is now only 78%. If I center it well again, you can see that we're at 89%. So we're losing so much by having filters that are not up to specs. And so using this spreadsheet, and again the link is in the description, you'll be able to model your own filters, and the spreadsheet will do the computation for you. As long as you have your telescope well defined, as I showed you how to do for the RASA 11, you'll be able to figure out how well your own filter works for your telescope, assuming of course the filter is actually up to specs, which is not a given. And if you want to go deeper, you can even simulate, the filter for your optics where its actually best wavelength or bandpass is. And this is actually exactly the type of calculations that are done when you're given diagrams like this from IDAS. They have this kind of stuff on their website a lot. Or that one for Oxygen 3. They basically build exactly those diagrams for various telescopes using those similar simulations. By the way, if you're a programmer and you know math better than I do, and you want to enhance this spreadsheet and make it into a program where instead of taking those like 1 millimeter thick slices of aperture, we actually take the limit towards 0, therefore the integral, well, please do it and give me the link, and I can advertise that to the community, because it would be really cool to have that as a website where you can just input your parameters and then everything is done like automatically. So with that tool, with this weapon effectively, when you see a filter manufacturer saying like, oh yeah, this filter is only appropriate for telescopes that are f5 or slower, that kind of stuff, Well, it doesn't really tell the whole story because the focal ratio is important, but also the central obstruction is super important. So the telescope design itself is also very important. And with this simulator, you can actually double check for at least using the official specifications for the filter, whether it is appropriate for your equipment. And the best way to do that is probably to use a relatively conservative effective refractive index of 1.8 and see where that leads us. I hope now you understand why I was saying this is an essential video to watch and an essential tool for anyone who's doing astrophotography from the city, because you will be owning narrowband filters and you will also feel the need for speed. And those two, so often they don't go well together. You have some really well-built filters like the IDAS filters whose graphs I showed in this video that can work really well for that. But with that, you can really double check before buying, because those narrowband filters, they are not cheap. But with that, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. How much do you think this tool can work for you? Will you be using it? Have you been using it after watching the video? I'd love to hear your feedback. Or, just to say hello, anything, it actually helps with the engagement of the video, and YouTube likes that. So if you also want to help the video and my channel in general, you can like the video, you can leave a comment, you can subscribe if you're new to the channel, in which case, welcome. And if you're planning on buying anything from Amazon, Agena, High Point Scientific, etc., if you use the links that I have in the description before doing so, it will help me out at no cost to you. Of course, as usual, my channel is made possible by my Patreon supporters and channel members. So if you want to really help, you can join those programs. It makes a whole lot of difference. Thank you so much, guys, again. And I'll have, of course, your names in the credit at the end of this video. With that, thank you so much for watching. I hope it was useful. Don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.